Sup gamers, Randy Potato here with a full review of Darkest Dungeon 2 Early Access from the very beginning to today. We'll cover all the major patches and give you guys an idea of how the game has progressed and whether it's worth purchasing for the full 1.0 release. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to subscribe. I post new videos every day. And become a YouTube member or join my Patreon for early access to upcoming videos. Darkest Dungeon 2 was the hotly anticipated follow-up to Darkest Dungeon 1. A wholesale change in both art and game direction. Darkest Dungeon 2 is a roguelite where you take one party along a 2 to 4 hour journey through various regions in order to tackle one of 5 final bosses. It includes an expansive meta progression system and a nice array of run variety with a big selection of heroes, hero subclasses, items, enemies, and bosses. The first iteration of this early access game was very bare bones, just like DD1, with only 9 heroes, no subclasses, straightforward progression, and only one final boss with 3 full regions. The game in this early state was also embarrassingly simple, with stress healing being far too powerful, making the extremely obnoxious relationship system pretty easy to manipulate. Without the hero subclasses, and with certain heroes, cough PD, being overpowered, there was little party variety. The lair bosses were not required to beat the game and thus were often ignored, since the final boss itself was quite underpowered and scaling not very necessary. Trinkets were also beyond boring, making for few exciting builds. If you stopped playing the game here, I don't blame you, but thankfully things got much better. We got various hotfixes to patch up some bugs, tune the terrible relationship system, and make the game a bit more challenging. After week 1, they finally added stress thresholds, which led to widespread complaining but saved the game from being another DD1 clone with endless obnoxious stalling. They also heavily buffed the cultists and final boss to be a real challenge. First real patch was in December, where they finally mandated players obtain a lair boss trophy to complete the game. This heavily increased the difficulty and strategic element of the game. They also added my beloved Infernal Flame for difficulty, though it pales in comparison to Torchless in Darkest Dungeon 1. They also added the Oasis, where you could pay relics to heal stress, which was pretty boring and cringe. The first real impactful patch came in late February last year, with the big advertisement surrounding the new creature dens, which brought back the famous spiders from Darkest Dungeon 1 among other creatures, offering a dangerous double wave challenge in exchange for incredible unique rewards. However, the biggest change here was the addition of hero paths, adding 2 subclasses for each of the 9 heroes. This brought us from extremely bland party selection to what is still one of the best and engaging sections of this game. The first pass, however, you could not select a path. It was randomly generated and also includes apprentice and master paths, which offered you heroes with already upgraded skills. This patch also made the Oasis we know today, where you can either heal stress and or obtain mineral spring water, making this a much more attractive node. They also added some new monsters and changed combo payoffs to make it more accessible, increasing the Grave Robber's effectiveness, though she still sucks. Among other small UI improvements, we also got the alt view, one of my favorite features. After a long silence, we got the Shroud patch in May, the largest patch to this game yet. They finally added a 4th full region, the Shroud, which far surpasses their previous efforts in art and sound design, though it's a bit too hard without the corresponding rewards. They also finally added the Act 2 boss, who is far more interesting and challenging than Act 1. This update also had a ton of changes to gameplay. They added ordained monsters, which is an intelligent way to scale the difficulty. They also made food useful. It used to just heal at inns, which is worthless, and now instead it increases max HP. There were a lot of smaller but still important UI and smaller balance changes. The next update was at the end of June and signaled the start of their monthly smaller update cycle. This update rebalanced every single trinket in the game, giving a large portion of them downsides as well as making the rare ones more interesting. This was more impactful for the game's longevity and enjoyment than the previous patch, making what was a bland and worthless mechanic into one of the most exciting in the game. We also got a new path for all heroes, most of them being more complex and interesting and completely changing hero playstyles, such as Carcass for Hellion and Yellow Hand for Highwayman. At the start of August, we got the big cultist rebalance, making them a far more persistent and interesting threat throughout the run. They added the new Altar and Herald enemies, and at the end of Region 4 you face a new mini-boss, the Exemplar. The Exemplar was also found in the mountain, which was changed shortly after as it was too demanding for the soft and wimpy player base. This update also further changed the trinket system, this time adding unique effects to each of the Dark Impulse trinkets, which enabled the cultist trinkets. In late September, they finally revamped the awful progression system, which was straightforward in getting the same set of rewards for each level progression. Instead, you now earn candles through various methods, including region goals, hero goals, boss kills, and general progression. You can then use these candles to purchase the rewards of your choice, from hero trinkets, paths, general stat buffs, to random gacha-style item unlocks, as well as unlocking stagecoach slots and giving general in-game buffs. This is sort of DD2's answer to the Hamlet in giving you your choice of permanent upgrades. This also added the memory system, which gives buffs for as long as you keep that hero alive, allowing you to retain your active quirks, good and bad, from run to run. This patch also changed the Guardian nodes at the end of regions to a single guaranteed cultist fight of progressing difficulty, while nerfing the mountain from Exemplar to normal Deacon Cardinal mashes, along with a host of hero path balance changes. This patch also gave us our first new hero, the Bounty Hunter, who, much to the rage of the player base, myself included, is now found and runs only through the hire mechanic, where you can purchase his services for one region rather than at the crossroads. This was a huge gut punch for a game that was desperate for new blood to spice up the game. The mechanic is pretty interesting, but still not something I personally interact with much, at least with my playstyle. Shortly after, they reintroduced the Infernal Flame, now unlockable at the altar, giving you the same challenge, this time with a bonus to candle rewards. Then in another hotfix a week later, they made massive changes to regions, making them more unique in the locations they offer, as well as shortening your first region and lengthening the final region to aid in candle accumulation and scale the difficulty. In November, they finally released the Act 3 boss, the Big Eye. This was the first real puzzle boss, and was widely panned by the user base for being supremely unclear, as well as the boss just nuking you from orbit, being the first enemy to just cleave for full party HP. This boss is still quite controversial, and I find it quite obnoxious for new players, and also somewhat restrictive for team comps, Man-at-Arms being far and away better than anyone else in this fight, but the challenge and the focus on player itemization is a welcome change from the first two bosses. This also, of course, brought balance changes, though just fewer than previous patches. Finally, in December, we got the most important patch of all, the full relationship rework. The previous relationship system was the biggest blight on this game, being supremely obnoxious, severely slowing down the game, and heavily decreasing player agency, even with so-called positive relationships. This changed to a more fluid system, with one affinity bar going from 0 to 20, with relationships now being temporary from end to end. They removed almost all the in-combat barks, replacing them with very rare but more impactful actions, and removed all barks that would eliminate your agency as a player, such as blocking heals, instead replacing it with more intelligent affinity losses for certain actions. I feel much more in control in the game with this system, and the game is much smoother and faster without the endless barks. This was the turning point for this game, and since this update I've been absolutely obsessed with the game, doubling my playtime and feeling zero burnout. If you're one of the people who dropped out of early access because of the previous garbage relationship system, I suggest giving it another try with the changes made in this patch. After a long holiday break, and the announcement of 1.0 being delayed to May, Red Hook came out swinging in February with our first new real hero, the Vestal from DD1. This gave us an additional back row hero and a healer, both of which were necessary for the game. The Vestal was a step in the more complex direction, changing the way the path system works, with direct skill adjustments rather than generic stat boosts. Pre-release, the Vestal was controversial because of questions surrounding how she would adjust from being a pure heal bot in DD1 to the new healing system in DD2, where they are more rare with use limits and thresholds introduced, but they did a fantastic job translating her as a versatile utility hero. In addition to the new hero, they introduced the new Dazed Stun mechanic, where dazing an already dazed hero now results in a stun, making a handful of skills and items much more useful. And our final update introduced a change to road types, the Stagecoach, the Loathing system, and introduced the long-awaited Pet system. Previously, roads were binary, either featuring a road fight, which are mostly boring and pointless, especially late game, or a safe road. This new update makes 5 different road types, keeping safe and fight roads, and entirely changing the loathing system from something that was really never interacted with to a key mechanic, with loathing now being gained either on certain roads or certain nodes, giving a buff to the final boss among other things. And finally, they added new unavoidable traps that interact with the new stagecoach system, where you have 2 different health pools, wheels and armor to contend with a fully intact stagecoach offering bonuses and a special fight for when you run out of either. Beyond making roads a bit more exciting and adding further strategic elements to the game, reducing the overall number of road fights has also lowered the runtime of the game, which is one of my core complaints. In the same vein, they have also reduced the length of the final region, which had become a real slog. Most runs I can now finish in under 3 hours, which is still a bit long for a roguelite, but it's on the right track. In the first version of this game, they also introduced the new Act 1, which is intended to be a bit easier as an introduction to the game for new players. You now receive 5 mastery at the first inn and no longer need a trophy. This act was briefly a 2-region affair, which could be speedrun in under an hour even, which is a nice change of pace for the longer slogs, but unfortunately was not quite balanced right and was moved shortly after, though it is supposed to be reintroduced for 1.0, along with variable run lengths at some point in the future. This basically silenced one of my last remaining complaints of the game, and they finally added pets, which are essentially another form of stagecoach equipment. Most of the pets have persistent buffs that interact with certain stagecoach gear types, the intention to create a sort of stagecoach build system. Unfortunately, in practice, this is a bit underwhelming, with the high cost and high RNG involved in securing the correct stagecoach gear in addition to the correct pet at N1. Still, it's an overall positive direction for the game. Overall, Red Hook took a big risk by completely changing the formula for their follow-up to the acclaimed Darkest Dungeon 1, and the bare bones early access didn't help matters. But just like in their first early access, each update brought major changes to the game, almost all of them in a positive direction. The game feels almost complete already, and 1.0 will be the biggest update yet. I strongly suggest anyone who enjoyed DD1 but bailed on this early in early access to give this game another try, because I believe it's in a great place and will only get better in time. It won't be a game for everyone, but it's worth a try, and you're also supporting a top tier company. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe and check out my Patreon or become a YouTube member for early access to my upcoming videos.